Welcome back to Beyond the Badge. The $50 bill was still spinning in the air when it landed at her feet. She did not move. She did not flinch. She just stood there, 12 years old, 5 feet tall, in the navy dress her mother had ironed the previous Sunday with careful, loving hands that would never iron anything again. Around her shoes, scattered across cold white marble, lay the most important documents she owned in this world. The trust agreement her father had signed when she was 7, the stock certificates her mother had protected with every legal tool she possessed, and 2 death certificates, crisp, official, unbearable, bearing the names of the only 2 people who had ever made her feel completely safe. 500 people stood in that glittering ballroom and watched. Some held their glasses, some raised their phones, some looked away, because looking away has always been the most comfortable thing to do when the world is being cruel to someone who cannot defend themselves. And the man who had done it, silver-haired, tailored suit, 54 years old and completely certain that a grieving 12-year-old girl was no threat to him at all, straightened his jacket and smiled at the crowd around him. Nobody in that room yet understood what they were truly witnessing. But to understand it, to really understand it, we have to go back 6 months earlier, to a warm house on the edge of Atlanta, to a Sunday morning in spring, to a little girl sitting on the edge of her bed, half asleep, while her mother stood behind her and braided her hair. And everything, absolutely everything, was still okay. Her name was Zoe Coleman. She was the kind of child that people noticed without being able to explain exactly why, not because she was loud or demanding, but because there was something in her eyes that suggested she was always paying closer attention than anyone realized. She liked books about history and documentaries about the ocean, and Saturday mornings when her father made too many pancakes and her mother pretended to be annoyed about it, and nobody was annoyed about anything at all. Her father, Marcus Coleman, had grown up with almost nothing. He had been raised by his grandmother, a quietly fierce woman named Pearl, who had worked 2 jobs her entire adult life and who had pressed into young Marcus every single morning the belief that a man's character was worth more than anything the world could give or take from him. Marcus had carried that belief through a scholarship to college, through long nights studying in borrowed library time, through every early morning of every year it had taken him to build Coleman Enterprises from a single logistics company into a $4.3 billion global operation. He had built it honestly, every contract clean, every handshake meant. Every person who worked for him treated like they mattered, because Marcus Coleman believed in the most sincere and uncomplicated way that they did. His wife, Vivian, was a Harvard-trained corporate attorney who had the kind of mind that could untangle a fraudulent contract in minutes, and the kind of heart that remembered every employee's child's name at the Christmas party. She had structured every major deal Marcus ever made, she had protected every asset, anticipated every threat, and prepared, with quiet and absolute thoroughness, for every possibility, including the ones that felt too painful to name. When Zoe was 7 years old, Vivian had sat with their attorney and finalized a trust document that left 87% of Coleman Enterprises directly and irrevocably to their daughter. Not to a board, not to a distant relative, not to any man in any expensive suit who might one day decide he deserved it more. To Zoe. At dinner, Marcus would set down his fork and look at his daughter the way fathers look at their children when they are trying to pass something important through the simple act of eye contact. "Zoe," he would say, "the most expensive thing in the world is a person's character. Guard yours like it is the only thing you have, because one day, baby girl, it will be." She had smiled and nodded and gone back to her food, the way children do when wisdom lands before they are ready for it. She would think about those words every day for the rest of her life. On a Tuesday evening in October, Marcus and Vivian Coleman kissed their daughter goodbye at the departure gate, promised to bring her back something from London, and boarded a private charter flight for a board summit overseas. Zoe had been at home with their housekeeper, Mrs. Edna, watching a movie, eating popcorn, completely unaware that 40 minutes after takeoff, Somewhere above the dark Georgia coastline, the world was rearranging itself into a shape she would never have chosen. There were no survivors. The weeks that followed were the kind that changed the texture of a person permanently. Not just the grief, which was enormous, but the silence. The specific silence of a house that used to be full of someone. The way Zoe would walk into the kitchen in the morning and reach automatically for the coffee her father always had brewing, and then remember. The way she would hear something funny during the day and turn to her mother, and then remember. The way remembering, over and over again, became its own kind of exhausting. She stopped talking much. She stopped eating regularly. She carried her father's leather work folder, worn at the corners, still holding the faint ghost of his cologne, with her everywhere she went because it was the heaviest thing she owned, and somehow the weight of it kept her grounded when the grief made her feel like she might simply float away. She was 12 years old. She was entirely alone in a way that no child should ever be. And somewhere across the city, in a corner office on the 42nd floor of the Coleman Enterprises building, a man named Victor Harland was making plans. Victor Harland had been the company's chief financial officer for 8 years. He was polished and precise and had the practiced warmth of someone who had learned, long ago, that charm was simply a more efficient version of deception. He had impressed Marcus Coleman with spreadsheets and strategy and an ability to explain complex financial structures in calm, reassuring language. Marcus had trusted him. The board had trusted him. The company had trusted him. And Victor Harland had spent 8 years deciding trust was simply a door left unlocked. In the 6 months since the crash, he had moved quietly, but deliberately. He had assumed the title of acting CEO. He had restructured reporting channels. He had redirected financial oversight through systems he controlled. He had transferred, through a series of carefully constructed shell companies and offshore accounts, $15 million that did not belong to him. And he had told himself, the way such men always do, that he had earned it. The Coleman Family Charity Gala, an annual event that Marcus and Vivian had hosted for 11 consecutive years, raising funds for youth programs across the South, was Victor Harland's chosen moment. He would stand before Atlanta's most powerful people, accept their applause, and make his position permanent. He would become, officially and publicly, the new face of everything Marcus Coleman had built. He had not considered Zoe. Ruth Abernathy, former federal judge, lifelong family friend, and Zoe's appointed legal guardian, had insisted the girl attend. She had sat across from Zoe at the kitchen table 2 evenings before the gala and said, in the gentle and immovable way that only certain women can manage, "Your parents built that event, Zoe. Their name is on that room. You belong there." Zoe had not wanted to go. She was 12 and grieving and exhausted, and the last thing she wanted was to stand in a bright room full of strangers who would look at her with that particular, careful pity that people aim at orphans. But Ruth had helped her into her navy dress, had smoothed her collar, had placed her father's leather folder into her hands, and said quietly, looking directly into her eyes, "Your mother always said the truth is the strongest thing a person can carry. Tonight, you carry yours." And Zoe Coleman had walked into the Harrington Hotel ballroom. For the first hour, she stayed near the edges, watching. She watched Victor Harland move through the crowd with the ease of a man who believes the room belongs to him. She watched him shake hands and receive congratulations and laugh that large, easy, hollow laugh. She watched people turn toward him the way people turn toward whoever holds the light, not knowing, not yet, that the light was stolen. And she felt something move beneath her grief, something quiet and clear, something her mother might have called seeing. She made her way through the crowd slowly, excusing herself, holding her folder steady against her chest. When she finally stood before Victor Harland, the man beside her nearly stepped on her. Harland looked down. His expression moved through surprise, then irritation, then the particular lazy cruelty of a man who has already decided that the person in front of him does not register. "Can I help you, sweetheart?" "My name is Zoe Coleman." Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they are held together by pure will. "My parents founded this company. I'm the majority shareholder of Coleman Enterprises, and I'd like to speak with you about the company's financial management." The conversations nearby went quiet. Victor Harland looked around at the faces watching him, and then he laughed. Not a small, private laugh, but a large, deliberate, public performance of a laugh, designed to make everyone in earshot feel that laughing along was the only reasonable response. He reached out and took the folder from her hands. He opened it, he looked at the documents, the trust agreement, the stock certificates, the legal filings, and something shifted behind his eyes for just a moment. Then, he crumpled 3 pages in his fist and let them fall to the marble floor. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a folded $50 bill, and released it into the air above her feet. "Go find the dessert table and let the adults handle the rest." And the bill spun once in the chandelier light and landed at her feet. The room went the kind of quiet that feels different from ordinary quiet. It felt like held breath, like the moment before something breaks. Phones were raised. A live stream that had begun as routine gala coverage was being watched in real time by thousands of people who had stumbled upon it without knowing what they were seeing. Comments were already moving too fast to read. And Zoe stood there. She felt the humiliation like heat across her face. She felt the grief rise up and mix with it until the two were indistinguishable. She thought about her mother's hands braiding her hair on Sunday mornings, humming something soft and wordless. She thought about her father's voice at the dinner table, low and certain. She thought about the leather folder open on the cold floor, her parents' most careful work scattered like it meant nothing. And she thought, in the way that children think when they have been pushed to the very edge of what they can bear and find, to their own surprise, that something remains, she thought about what her mother had said. The truth is the strongest thing a person can carry. She bent down. Slowly, carefully, with every eye in that room upon her, she picked up every single page. She smoothed the crumpled ones with her palms. She pressed out every fold. She gathered every document back into her arms. The trust agreement, the stock certificates, the death certificates that bore her parents' names, and she held them against her chest the way you hold something that cannot be replaced. She stood back up straight. Her eyes were full, but they did not spill. Not yet. She waited. She did not have to wait long. Ruth Abernathy entered through the side door of the ballroom. She did not hurry because women like Ruth Abernathy have never needed to hurry to change the temperature of a room. Behind her walked their attorney, Mr. Dalton, carrying a briefcase with the calm expression of a man who has been preparing for this specific moment for 4 months. And behind him came 2 men in dark jackets whose federal credentials, shown quietly to hotel security, had required no further discussion. Ruth crossed the ballroom and stood beside Zoe. She did not say anything. She simply placed one hand on the girl's shoulder, steady and warm and certain, and Zoe felt something in her chest loosen slightly, the way a knot loosens when the right hands find it. Mr. Dalton opened his briefcase. "Mr. Harland," he said, and his voice was the kind of quiet that carries farther than shouting. "Over the past 4 months, our office conducted a complete forensic audit of Coleman Enterprises' financial records. What we found were $15 million in unauthorized transfers routed through 3 offshore accounts registered to shell companies tied directly to your personal holdings." He paused. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been fully briefed. The board of Coleman Enterprises has been convened for an emergency session, and the trust documents you dropped on this floor tonight have been legally filed with the state of Georgia since Zoe Coleman was 7 years old." The room did not breathe. Victor Harlan's face did what faces do when everything built on dishonesty finally meets the ground. The confidence left first, then the certainty, then the composure, until what remained was simply a man standing in a room full of people who could now see him without any of the careful layers he had constructed to be seen through. He opened his mouth. "Over," said Ruth Abernathy, quietly. Just that word. And somehow, in that room, at that moment, it was the most complete sentence anyone had ever spoken. Zoe walked to the front of the room. She was 12 years old. She was still trembling, her eyes were still full, but she walked with her spine straight and her father's documents pressed against her heart, and she stood at the podium that still bore her family's name, and someone placed the microphone in her hands, and she looked out at 500 faces, faces that laughed, faces that watched, faces that had looked away, and she took one breath. Just one. My father built this company. He built it from nothing with his own hands because his grandmother told him that a man's character was worth more than anything the world could offer him. My mother spent her entire career making sure that everything he built would last, that it would be protected, that it would be passed on. She stopped, swallowed. 6 months ago, I lost them both, on the same night, in the same moment, and I have spent every day since then trying to figure out how to keep standing in a world where they are not standing with me. The silence in that room was total. I am 12 years old, and her voice broke slightly on that sentence, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of what it meant to be 12 years old and to have already carried what she had carried. I am standing here tonight because a man decided that meant I was powerless, that because I was young, and because I was grieving, and because of the color of my skin, he could take what my parents spent their lives building, and I would never even know how to ask for it back. She looked down at the documents in her hands, at the crumpled pages she had smoothed with her own palms on that cold marble floor. My mother told me that the truth is the strongest thing a person can carry. My father told me that character is the most expensive thing in the world. She looks back up. I am standing here because they were right. And I want every single person watching tonight, every child who has ever been told they are too young, too small, too different, too powerless to matter, I want you to know that your parents' love for you is not nothing. What they built for you is not nothing. And you... Her voice broke fully then, and she let it break, because some things deserve to be felt in public. You are not nothing. The first person who began to clap was a woman near the back of the room who had been crying since Zoe bent down to pick up those pages. Then another. Then another. And then the sound moved through that ballroom like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. Victor Harlan was escorted from the Harrington Hotel that night by federal agents while 500 people watched in silence. The charges against him, wire fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, were formally filed within the week. The board of Coleman Enterprises voted unanimously to restore full legal authority to Ruth Abernathy and Mr. Dalton on Zoe's behalf. The $15 million began its slow process of recovery through asset forfeiture proceedings. The live stream reached 200,000 viewers before midnight. By morning, it had crossed into the millions. News networks ran the footage. Parents across the country played it at dinner tables. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Strangers sent it to other strangers with messages that said simply, "Watch this." Because sometimes that is all you need to say. Zoe did not watch any of it that night. Ruth drove her home through the quiet Atlanta streets. Mrs. Edna had left the kitchen light on and a cup of chamomile tea on the counter, and Zoe sat in her father's leather chair in the study, the big one that still held the shape of him, that still smelled, faintly, of the life he had lived, and she held his worn folder in her lap, and she finally let herself cry. Not for the cameras, not for the story that was already spreading across the world without her, She cried because she was 12 years old and she missed her mother's hands and her father's voice and the specific sound of her family together in a house that used to be full. She cried for a long time, and then, slowly, she stopped. She looked down at the folder in her hands, the worn corners, the soft leather, the weight of it that had anchored her through 6 months of grief. She pressed her palm flat against the cover, the way you press your hand against something you want to remember through touch. "I didn't let go, Daddy," she whispered to the quiet and the dark, and whatever remains of a person after they are gone. "I picked it all back up, just like you taught me." Outside the study window, Atlanta was moving through its ordinary night. Traffic and streetlights and the distant sound of the world continuing, the way the world always continues, regardless of what any one person has survived inside it. But inside that chair, inside that room, inside that 12-year-old girl who had walked into the hardest night of her life and had not let go of a single page, something had been settled. Something her parents had spent their entire lives preparing her to know. That the truth does not need permission. That love does not stop protecting the people it was meant for, even after the hands that carried it are gone. And that courage, real courage, the kind that bends down on a cold marble floor in front of 500 people and picks up every scattered piece of what matters, that kind of courage does not come from certainty. It comes from love. It always has. It always will. Marcus and Vivian Coleman had built an empire. But the greatest thing they ever built was her. If this story reached something inside you, if it made you think of someone you love, someone you have lost, or someone who never gave up, even when giving up would have been so much easier, please take one moment right now and subscribe to Beyond the Badge. Press that bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs to hear today that they matter, that what their parents gave them cannot be taken, and that the truth they carry is more powerful than any room they will ever have to walk into. We tell these stories because they deserve to be told, because the quiet heroes deserve to be heard, because courage like this, gentle, grieving, unbreakable courage, should never go unseen. We will see you in the next story, right here, Beyond the Badge.